Donald Trump is panicking as his meeting with King Charles is off to a very bad start. First, when Donald Trump, I guess, greeted King Charles at the White House, Trump tried to squeeze the hell out of King Charles's hand, but King Charles then squeezed Donald Trump's hand harder, and Donald Trump really didn't know what to do. He was trying to, grab King Charles' hand. It was very weird and embarrassing. Also, Donald Trump was trying to tell King Charles that Congress was definitely going to now allow taxpayers to pay for his golden ballroom. But that ran into a huge roadblock as Democrats and even some Republicans said, "No, Donald, we're not going to have taxpayers fund this thing." And Donald Trump was very embarrassed about that. You can literally see him speaking to King Charles saying, that's where the ballroom's going to be. And King Charles doesn't care at all. Again, just completely and utterly humiliating. And then you had Foreign Minister Araghchi of Iran hold this meeting with Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump's guy, right? Donald Trump's a Putin bootlicker. And so this was timed around the same time, I think on purpose by Putin to have the Iranian foreign minister in Russia to overshadow King Charles meeting with Donald Trump in the White House. And just think about it. I mean, Putin normally wouldn't do a meeting like this with the foreign minister. Usually it would be foreign minister to foreign minister level. Lavrov meeting with the Raghi. But Putin wanted to make it very clear that Russia has the back of Iran and foreign minister Araghi.
I need you to watch this video of King Charles and then understand what this means historically.
U.S. Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances.
Now, British royals aren't supposed to be political, but King Charles just reminded a joint session of the United States Congress on the importance of checking executive power by referencing our own Supreme Court rulings that reference the Magna Carta. Now, what's the Magna Carta? I'm so glad you asked. That is an ancient British document dating back to the reign of King John II, aka Bad King John from the Robin Hood tales. In reality, he was actually bad. Bad enough that his barons created this document called Magna Carta, which put boundaries or rules in place on what the crown was and was not allowed to do, and what the barons and other aristocrats could do to redress those issues they had. And he signed it. And this is often cited as a foundational political document. It was revolutionary at the time. No one had ever tried to put limits on royal power. And our own Supreme Court has used Magna Carta as precedent in their own rulings for checks and balances, saying, yes, you are allowed to do that, or no, you're not allowed to do that. But the King of England, think about that, the King of England just lectured the United States Joint Session of Congress on checking executive power, coming up on the 250th anniversary of us rebelling against his ancestor. Oh, I'm loving this.
The war, the conflict, and bringing it down into a moment of reunification, I thought was majestic.
Yes, well, as you know, I'm no great fan of President Trump, but he didn't put a foot wrong there. Certainly that reference to the special relationship, that's what US presidents have to chuck into every speech for a British audience. But I think, as Michael just pointed out, the phrase that America has no closer friends than the British, I think, was the really important bit. In other words, for all the rhetoric we've had from President Trump, from all the anger about what we've done or not done, at the end of the day, he seems to be acknowledging that really we are tied together. Now, if that is genuine, bear in mind it was obviously not written by President Trump, by somebody else, but assuming those are genuinely from him, there is hope for the future. We can get through our differences.
It would have been written by a speechwriter in the State Department, but then there's nothing wrong with that. No. The President will have read it, he will have agreed with it, otherwise he wouldn't have delivered it. So most politicians give speeches that are written by others. President Obama's speech that you referred to, Martin, will also have been written by others. I don't think that takes away from it, because specialists will carefully craft a speech, and it takes many, many hours to craft a speech that carefully and that well. But it doesn't detract from the fact that was one of the most powerful and moving speeches I've heard, certainly the President ever.
Welcome to the channel. Prince Charles and his wife Camilla, they are on official visit to the United States.
James, thank you. James will be with us all morning long, and of course for the joint address later today by the King across the Capitol there on Capitol Hill. That's later today. Again, the first royal to do that since his mother, Queen Elizabeth. You heard James talking about the tension between the U.S. and U.K. over foreign policy and other issues. President Trump telling the BBC in a phone interview just days ago that King Charles' visit to the U.S. could in fact lay the groundwork to repair U.S. relations with the United Kingdom.
I just spoke to Donald Trump on the phone. I just rang his number and he answered it himself saying, hello. And the first thing I asked him was whether the King's visit to Washington next week can help repair the currently difficult relationship with the United Kingdom. Mr. Trump said, absolutely, the answer is yes. He's a great man, a brave man, and he and the Queen will absolutely be a positive. So then I asked him about a recent social media post in which he said Keir Starmer still had time to recover. What did he mean by that? Well, he said, if the Prime Minister opens the North Sea for oil drilling and strengthens his immigration policies, he can recover. But if he does not do that, he said, I don't think he has a chance. Donald Trump is angry that the UK didn't offer more assistance with his war on Iran. And he said to me on the phone that he didn't need help from the UK, but Britain should have been there. And it was a test to see whether or not the country would get involved. Then I asked him about his threat to destroy an entire civilization in Iran. Was that, I asked, a threat to use nuclear weapons? Well, he said, the other side is dying to make a deal. So whatever I'm saying, whatever I'm doing, it seems to be working well. And with that, he said, thank you, and ended the call.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we meet in times of great uncertainty, in times of conflict from Europe to the Middle East, which pose immense challenges for the international community and whose impact is felt in communities the length and breadth of our own countries. We meet too in the aftermath of the incident not far from this great building that sought to harm the leadership of your nation and to foment wider fear and discord. Let me say with unshakable resolve, such acts of violence will never succeed.
Prince Charles has just embarrassed Donald Trump in Congress. You know, European Union and UK, they never agreed on invading Iran. So the guy said it straight to his face that it wasn't right. That's why he never supported NATO to invade. There are so many issues he tackled on. The Strait of Hormuz, so many issues. Their relationship with the United States. So Trump just looked at him like an innocent person. So watch these videos.
Before we really begin, I want to congratulate Charles on having made a fantastic speech today at Congress. He got the Democrats to stand. I've never been able to do that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. They liked him more than they've ever liked any Republican or Democrat, actually.
Donald Trump is panicking as his meeting with King Charles is off to a very bad start. First, when Donald Trump, I guess, greeted King Charles at the White House, Trump tried to squeeze the hell out of King Charles's hand, but King Charles then squeezed Donald Trump's hand harder, and Donald Trump really didn't know what to do. He was trying to grab King Charles' hand. It was very weird and embarrassing. Also, Donald Trump was trying to tell King Charles that Congress was definitely going to now allow taxpayers to pay for his golden ballroom, but that ran into a huge roadblock as Democrats and even some Republicans said, no, Donald, we're not going to have taxpayers fund this thing. And Donald Trump was very embarrassed about that. And then you had Foreign Minister Araghchi of Iran hold this meeting with Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump's guy, right? Donald Trump's a Putin bootlicker. And so this was timed around the same time, I think on purpose by Putin, to have the Iranian foreign minister in Russia to overshadow King Charles meeting with Donald Trump in the White House. And just think about it. I mean, Putin normally wouldn't do a meeting like this with a foreign minister. Usually it would be foreign minister to foreign minister level, Lavrov meeting with Aragci. But Putin wanted to make it very clear that Russia has the back of Iran and Foreign Minister Aragci, while Donald Trump was trying to suck up to King Charles because Donald Trump loves kings. And as Donald Trump then started getting like very nervous and insecure, he basically kicked out all of the press. So he called a lid fairly early, right around 6 p.m. Calling a lid means get out press. And he pretty much had a lid on for most of the day, which again is odd because you would think that he would want the press around him and King Charles, but that didn't happen. I think right after that handshake, not a lot of camera action.
Man, oh man, MAGA is not going to like to see this one. King Charles just addressed a joint meeting of Congress, meaning that every single member of Congress is in attendance, and he took some very clear shots at Donald Trump, referencing the deterioration of American democracy and our checks and balances and more. And for some reason, none of the Republicans understood that he was talking about America as it stands and Donald Trump. And so they'd get up in the middle of the speech and applaud what he's saying, like agree with him going after Donald Trump. You just have to see it. It is quite a sight to see. But I want to start with this clip right here, where King Charles is talking about the checks and balances that exist in the United States, referencing the Magna Carta, how that's been cited in so many different Supreme Court cases, talking about those very checks and balances which Donald Trump and the Republicans have looked to eradicate. And again, the Republicans were applauding for him talking about this. I think they're oblivious. It just went right over their head. Just watch.
Roots go even further back in history. The U.S. Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789. Not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances.
Yeah, of course executive power is subject to checks and balances. Do the Republicans know that? Do the Trump supporters know? I don't think they do. And it's just really funny to see them. Let's see if I can get the shot right here. Look at these folks. Look, Mike Lawler there, Republican representative on his feet clapping. These are all Republican representatives. Who else did I just spot right there? Look at Senator Tim Scott, Senator James Lankford. All of these Republicans, members of the Trump administration, are getting up and applauding for checks and balances. Once again, something that Donald Trump has attacked basically on a daily basis, whether it be through Truth Social posts or action that he's taken. And it's a fundamental part of America that they've just completely disregarded. It's just right over their head. And this is a consistent theme throughout the speech. It is just remarkable. Let's move on to the next clip.
Donald Trump's war of choice on Iran is not his only. Donald Trump has launched trade wars, wars of words against NATO, and of course, wars with countries' leaders on Truth Social. And that extended itself out to today, when King Charles took a mocking tone, took a bit of a shot at Donald Trump for one of those wars in the address that he gave to Congress, and Donald Trump subsequently melted down on Truth Social, which everyone, I think, could expect. Donald Trump has been challenging our allies like no president we have ever seen before, and the result has been his own isolation that he complains about and did in this Truth Social post. We are going to get into it all, but it does start with the humiliation of really our entire government that was very subtly communicated through King Charles's speech, starting with a call out of the battle that we have not been fighting against climate change, and a pan to the man who is certainly part of the responsibility for that failure. It was a hilarious clip before we get to Trump.
As we celebrate the beauty that surrounds us, our generation must decide how to address the collapse of critical natural systems, which threatens far more than the harmony and essential diversity of nature. We ignore at our peril the fact that these natural systems in other words, nature's own economy, provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security.
I think that the cinematography of that shot deserves like an Oscar. For King Charles to be talking about climate change and then to cut to Lee Zeldin, who is the EPA administrator who has failed at his job, has been doing everything he can to protect big oil and big polluters, making sure that anyone can do whatever they want without, of course, any consideration for the environmental impact, because this administration denies the existence of humans' impact on the environment. A+ to you for that camera work right there. And King Charles is right. I know a lot of people have said it's a little weird that King Charles is in the United States, that he would want to visit with Donald Trump. I've said in a previous video, I don't know what the politics are of this decision back, in the UK, but okay, I don't know who would want to visit Donald Trump right now. I do, though, appreciate him kind of recentering to a degree, at least the view of our allies, especially in the shot that he took against Trump right here. The Democratic Twitter account Headquarters wrote, King Charles appears to remind Trump that NATO supported the U.S. in the wake of 9/11 after Trump's repeated claims that NATO has never helped America. We're going to get to that clip, but I do want to point out that Trump recently made one of those claims, saying about Iran, we've wiped out the opposition. If we ever had to keep going, we would wipe out the rest of it very quickly, and I hope we don't have to do that, but it may be possible that we do that. But NATO was not there for us. We are not happy with NATO. And then, of course, King Charles said this about NATO.
King Charles just called out Donald Trump and Republicans for abuse of power while addressing Congress. Now, if you missed it today, King Charles addressed a joint session of Congress. And during his speech, he was talking about the history of the two countries and the unity. But then he got to the topic of law and what U.S. law was based on when he said this.
Not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances.
Yeah, he got a standing ovation, and I felt like Republicans were standing and clapping because they felt they had to, knowing full well he was talking about them and how they're not exercising their checks and balances on Donald Trump. But he went on later and talked about NATO and how important it was and how that they should be unified against Russia in Ukraine. Donald Trump brought King Charles to this country thinking he was bringing a buddy over for a cute little visit. King Charles took an opportunity to take some subtle jabs at Trump and Republicans.
Latest breaking news. King Charles just called out Donald Trump and the Republicans for abuse of power while addressing Congress today. Now, if you missed it, King Charles addressed a joint session of Congress and he got into the subject of law. And this subject of law is what it's based on when he said this, quote, not least as the foundation of principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances. And this was so good as he got a standing ovation from Republicans too. They were standing, clapping, knowing that he basically was talking about them and Mr. Donald Trump. Way to go, King Charles. Way to come over and address the Republicans and everyone else in this joint session of Congress and tell them exactly how it is. Basically telling them how the world feels about this administration.
So King Charles addressed the Congress today. He delivered some pretty pointed messages directed at Trump and his administration. He praised multilateral institutions like NATO. He also emphasized that America's words carry weight on the world stage. He warned about climate change, all positions that directly contradict Trump's worldview. And the crazy thing is that he did all of this while sitting at Trump's house. And he attended a state dinner with him that same night. Another thing to point out is that one congressman was disappointed that he didn't address the Epstein survivors who were there in that same building. He said the British ambassador had privately said that he would. Wasn't one of them in the Epstein files? What's funny is that Trump responded by saying that Charles made a great speech and that he was very jealous. What?
Let me be very clear about what just happened at the White House. King Charles flew across the Atlantic, the actual King of England, and while he's standing right there on American soil, Britain's own ambassador is on tape saying the US-UK special relationship doesn't exist. His words on audio, published by the Financial Times. While the king was in the building, that's not a leak. That's a grenade. Ambassador Christian Turner told a room full of UK students, and I quote, "The only country that has a special relationship with the United States is Israel, not Britain. Not the country whose monarch just flew in for a royal visit, Israel." So Trump threw King Charles a whole parade, troops lined up, handshakes, the pageantry, all of it for a relationship his own ally just called nostalgic, backwards looking, baggage. You can't make this up. But it gets worse. That same ambassador said on that same tape that he is shocked that nobody in the Trump regime has faced consequences for their connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Shocked. The word he used was shocked. Meanwhile, Britain had a senior royal step down. They removed their own ambassador, the one before Turner, because of Epstein links. Prince Andrew, Peter Mandelson, gone. And over here, nothing. Not one accountability hearing, not one resignation. Trump himself is all through those files, and he's out here inspecting troops like he's auditioning for a History Channel special. Speaking of which, Trump didn't even know where to stand during the troop inspection. Bumped straight into King Charles, on camera, in front of the world. And while everyday Americans are choosing between groceries and gas while people are living paycheck to paycheck if they're lucky enough to have one, Trump's regime is out here staging lavish royal ceremonies. Pomp, circumstance, gilded nonsense. All of it paid for on the backs of people who can't afford to fill their tanks. Energy experts are now warning another gas price spike is coming, and they're saying Trump's own social media posts are making it worse. Market manipulation dressed up as diplomacy. So let's recap. The king came. The relationship got exposed as fake. The Epstein scandal got called out by a foreign government official. Gas prices are about to explode. And Trump bumped into the King of England. This isn't a presidency. This is a reality show with nuclear codes.
Thank you for watching Great Minds Blacks.